So, in this program, we're going to be talking about sticky learning. Not a particularly lovely phrase, but let's get into what it means. So, this is going to be really important if you work in learning development, a bit of training, perhaps, whether you're working within a business, whether you're working freelance. Because one of the problems many of us have is how do we get from telling people stuff, whether we are using PowerPoint slides, whether we are writing on flip charts, whether we've got activities, exercises, role play, whether we have something experiential. How do we do all of those things? But importantly, get what we particularly want to stick into people's heads to stick there. That's the goal. That's the aim. Because no matter how engaging your session is, no matter how much people say nice things about it, when it comes down to it, we need it to actually be accessible. What we're really thinking about in this session is if we start to think about retention and recall. So how can you remember and recall? How can you pull back what you need to remember when you need it? And a big part of this is thinking, if you think of perhaps some songs you might remember in your youth. Now, no matter how old you are, how is it that you can remember those songs? Well, because they had your attention at the time, because there was some motivation perhaps to learn them. You wanted to fit in with everybody else, or you wanted to know the words, or whatever it was that was important to you. And there was a degree of there's a key element here of memory. Your brain is choosing to remember those lyrics. And what you'll notice often is you might hear a bit of a tune or a jingle or something from a TV show from when you were a child, and years later you can still remember large and substantial bits of it. And yet, when we go into a work setting where we're trying to recall what we want to recall, it is sometimes so difficult. And the good news is, it's not just your age, it's not just the fact that you're busy, it's not just there's so much other stuff going on in your life. The reality is that we can design training, we can design meetings and briefings and presentations and conferences so that they are far more engaging. And this is key. Whether or not you actively want people to learn, or whether or not you're just trying to share some ideas to put a briefing out there so that actually we can get into people's heads and get them thinking, yeah, I've got that. I understand that. And they can retain and recall it. That's what we're driving to do. Now, this little program is going to be maybe 20, 25 minutes. And I want to start with something immediately that I'd like you to learn, please. So none, shoe, tree, door, and hive are our first 5 things that I want you, please, to remember right now. Now, there's a little picture there, and you can use that picture, or if you've got a favorite nun in mind, you can use that, whether it's Sister Act or Sound of Music. I don't mind. But none, shoe, tree, door, hive. Now, if you're struggling to remember those 5 things already, please notice that they rhyme with the numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. This will probably be a lot easier for you to recall now. So a nun, a shoe. If you like your shoes, pick your favorite shoe. And when you're thinking about these, really just take a moment. Think of a nun, picture, but think of movement, think of energy, think of any extremes. So maybe the nun is very, very tall, or maybe as the nun's moving, her habit is swirling and moving as she walks. So think about the shoe, right? Shoes sometimes smell, right? Not your shoes, I know, but think of a shoe that's particularly smelly. Or if you like heels, it's got huge heels, but whatever it is that's important to you. Likewise, a tree. What's your favorite tree? You've got to have one somewhere, right? And if you don't have a favorite tree, I get that, but you can imagine an enormous tree and the swishing and the whooshing sounds that that tree makes in different weather. And the door, think of your front door, or think of your partner's front door, or your parents, or the door where you grew up, or your work door. You get the picture, right? This has got to be something, and just picture it for a moment. It will literally take by now you should have done this, right? I'm just walking you through to get a sense of how deeply you've got to get into this. Likewise, the hive, the beehive. Don't just think of the beehive, but consider also what comes with beehives, but bees, right? Bees on a hot summer's day, that buzzing sound they make. You know, in the air, just the heat, you can feel that, and that buzzing you can hear from all the bees hard at work. Now, you should have none, shoe, tree, door, and hive in your brain now. So let's add sticks, heaven, wait, sign, and hen. Now, sticks, not particularly exciting, but maybe you like chopsticks, or maybe you like martial arts fighting sticks, or maybe there's a pile of firewood in your home, but get something that means something to you. Likewise, heaven, your traditional idea of heaven, or whatever your version of heaven is, or is there somewhere on the planet that is your perfect holiday space, your heaven on earth? Think of that great big weight. Now, is it down the gym, or is it the weight you've just managed to lift, or is it one of those big cartoon massive weights, the 1-ton weights you used to see in cartoons as a child? A sign, is there a road sign that just tells you you're coming home after a day at work? And finally, a hen. Think of an enormous hen. Think of the sounds that hens make. Think of them scratching in the dust and the way they walk. All right, you should have those 10. We're going to leave those alone. We'll come back to them in a minute, and we're going to start to think about cognitive load. We're going to think about what is it we can do to make memory sticky. We're going to get into this whole idea about how can we design our meetings, our presentations, and our learning so that people want to take it in and are better able to retain and recall the information we give them. So I referred to cognitive load theory just a moment ago. And what we're thinking about here is John Sweller. I completely forgot John's name. Sorry, John. All right, let's just go back a bit. Let's move on. Now, John Sweller is credited with this whole idea of cognitive load theory. What is it? Well, it pretty much thinks cognitive load theory. That's a catchy name, right? So John Sweller is credited with this idea of when we're trying to learn something, when we're trying to do anything, we're using our working memory. Right now, you're using your working memory. And the problem with that is that working memory is probably going to have limited capacity. So if we can't design a message, a conference, if we can't design our training so that it is sticky, we're going to struggle to keep that information in our minds. We can learn it in the short term. We can learn it there and then. We can feel like we've got it, but actually there and then isn't the time we need it, is it? We're going to need it further down the line when we need to access that information. We need to remember it. We need to have a degree of motivation to pull it back out of our brains. We need to have something there that's going to help us to retain and recall it when we absolutely need it. So Sweller talks about this idea of moving the new information from the working memory to the longer term memory so that we're able to access it. And if we think back to those song lyrics, when you were learning them, but somehow they passed into your long-term memory, didn't they? You can remember things that happened when you were 5 years old or 7 years old, but sometimes trying to remember yesterday is so difficult. Trying to remember something, trying to take in and take on board what's being told to you there and then can feel really difficult. And there's a great cartoon. I don't know if you remember Gary Larson, very popular cartoonist in the 80s and 90s. This idea of, can I be excused, my brain is full. Well, it turns out that isn't quite so ridiculous. That is pretty much what the argument is for cognitive load. And so we've got to consider these three things: memory, attention, and motivation. Memory, attention, and motivation. Memory, you know as well as I do, there are things we can do to make memory a little bit more likely to work well. So we know, for example, acronyms and rhymes and music and movement, and we know emotion and excitement. We know some of these things can help us pass things into our memory so we can retain and recall them better. We know that if you have greater level of attention, you've got far greater chance of remembering what you're supposed to remember, right? So If you think of those song lyrics, why did they have your attention? Well, probably because the lyrics went with a time in your life, or with a person in your life, or with an event or a place. And so you were bound up with everything that happened. We weren't just in working memory, we were working in longer term memory. We're experiencing a lot more. Think about motivation. Now, for you to be watching this, no one's made you. So you've come to this program with a degree of motivation. You want to make your learning more sticky. Now, compare that to an 8 o'clock in the morning. You arrive at work and your boss goes, "Oh, yeah, we go on a training program today." Off you go. You're late. Go on, hurry up. Now, if you've ever started a training session with a room full of people with their arms folded, glaring at you, you will know that your first task is to encourage them to be engaged, to want to be there, to talk about what they want to get out of the program. This is why L&D people always start with, what do you want to get out of here? Why are you here? What's the aim of you being here? So we've got to start to consider, how can we create our information and our learning so that we can tap into the memory, so that we can grab people's attention, so that they want to engage with the content on many different levels. And we've got to find ways to motivate. That is often as simple as, why are you on this program? Now, of course, that often leads to the comic answer, I was sent. What do you want to get out of today? An early finish. All good stuff. But we've got to think about the information that we give from these perspectives. Now, let's go back to our shopping list, because that's what we've now got on the screen. Now, you'll remember your number peg system. So we're going to use that to remember these 10 items in order. So you're not going to be going, as you might have done in the olden days, milk, bananas, dry clean the duvet, milk, bananas, you're not going to be doing that. We're going to use the number peg system that we have just learned to remember these 10 items. So we know that number 1 is represented by a nun. I want you to do this right now. The nun that you remembered when we went through it the first time, I want you to remember that nun wrapped in a giant hot dog bun. Or maybe the nun is juggling with bread rolls and you can smell the bread and there are breadcrumbs going everywhere. Or maybe the nun is in a massive sandwich, mattress-sized slices of bread. Now, once you've got that image and the sound and the smell and the taste, put it over here and move on to number 2. Shoe and bananas. That pair of shoes you thought of earlier, imagine if they had bananas in them. Imagine putting your feet in. Imagine the smell of bananas. Imagine the feeling of bananas all between your toes. Imagine how squidgy that would feel. Now think about 3, your tree. Think about your favorite tree, absolutely swathed in duvets. The trunk wrapped up in these wonderful clean duvets. The duvets swirling and swaying on the in the wind. Absolutely beautiful, and you can smell clean duvets. That's always a nice smell, right? Your door. Remember the door you had? Imagine it covered in hair. Your hair, any hair you like, a hairy door. Imagine stroking the door. Imagine putting your hand into the hair to get to the letterbox or to the key. Number 5, that beehive, remember it, covered in milk. Imagine milk cartons everywhere, the smell of milk going off. Imagine milk oozing out where honey ought to be coming out. Milk is coming out. There's your number 1 to 5. You've got your key number and then your shopping item. And then we're on to number 6, the sticks. You drive your car into a car wash, but instead of the big foamy things, there are sticks coming down, scraping. You know the sound of wood or metal scraping, the glass shattering, your paint all being scraped off. Number 7, your heaven image, light bulbs falling from everywhere, light bulbs flying at you from all directions. The sound of light bulbs tinkering and smashing. And number 8, weight, that giant weight you've got on a huge pile of eggs, smashing them all up, eggs dripping over the weights, running down over the whether it says 10 kilograms or 1 ton or whatever. Number 9, the sign you've got covered in your swimwear, either too small, too tight, too embarrassing, massive and baggy, the smell of chlorine or the sea, wherever you like to swim. And number 10, finally, the hen in sunglasses. That hen with attitude. Imagine that hen strutting down the high street making for you. All right, You've now got your 10 shopping items. We will come back to those a little bit later on. Because what we need to do is to think about what is it, if we understand this idea of cognitive load, if we understand the idea of memory and attention and motivation, how can we make our learning more sticky? Knowledge, the thing you want your audience to listen to, understand, and to go with. Plus, we've got emotional elicitation, repetitive application, pattern recognition. And we've got 3 more I'll come to in a minute. If we add knowledge to one of those, then we start to get a more sticky effect. And you could apply this in the very next thing that you're delivering. So emotional elicitation, what is that? Well, think about those song lyrics I mentioned earlier on. If we can create an emotional attachment, then it's much easier to retain and recall the information. How is it that everybody knows the lyrics to Bohemian Rhapsody by Queen? Mama just killed a man. That's the opening lyric. That's pretty emotional. And it's got a bit of opera in there and some rock and the piano, just the singing and all those multi-track voicings. There's so much going on in that song. Think about the last time you saw an old picture of yourself or somebody important to you. You didn't just remember the moments, but you felt it. You felt an immediate emotional response to that. Think about when you've been on holiday and you've had a drink, a liqueur at the end of the evening, and it's such a nice one, you went back every night for it. When you came back home, you found that drink. And as soon as you opened the lid, you smelt that and you felt the same feelings. That is emotional elicitation. We can do that in training, can't we? We can start to bring things to life. We can use stories. We can create an entire explanation based not around just flip charts or just PowerPoints or just Excel spreadsheets, but we can actually create the moments, the experience, the understanding that we want our audience to listen to. What's more interesting? Somebody who walks on stage and puts their PowerPoint on and says, well, I have to take you through this. Or somebody who walks on stage and goes, I want to tell you what happened in June 1987. Okay. All of a sudden, we're brought in to what's going on. And let's look at multisensory input. This is the second of these 6. Now, you know about visual, audio, and kinesthetic. There are, for most of us, 5 senses: visual, audio, kinesthetic. I can see it, I can hear it, I can feel it. Kinesthetic, emotions. We've got olfactory and gustatory as well, smell and taste. Can we create different channels of learning for our audience? We don't need to worry about who is what, but we can just put out more ways of sharing the same information. If you want to talk about your org chart at work, why don't you send the org chart out to people in advance? Why don't you put the org chart on the walls? Why don't you put the org chart on the spreadsheet when they're coming in for their coffee in Danish and say, find somebody who's in a different part of the organization and introduce yourself? Why don't you ask people to share stories about their part of the organization? In other words, you're coming at exactly the same piece of work, the org chart, from 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 different approaches. That way, we start to input different ways, and we are far more likely that our audience can remember, retain, and recall the information they need. Now, while we're thinking about it, repetitive application is really important. And while we're thinking about it, repetitive application is really important. You see, what's really important is repetitive application. Now, this doesn't just mean saying the same things over and over and over again. You'll be pleased to know. But it is a little bit about how can we encourage our learners to keep reaccessing the information. So spaced repetition. Once we've used this bit of information, can we build in a way to encourage you to use it again soon? If we're going to teach you about the org chart, can we get you doing something with the org chart later on in the day? Can we have an action learning set a week later for colleagues to come and share what experiences they've had? Retrieval practice is simply Testing yourself. It's covering up the answers and saying, right, what do I think is this? We've all done it. We've all done that at school. And I'm not saying this is the only solution. This is just one of many. But this is allowing our audience to keep practicing and accessing the information they need to. And meaning making is about finding the links for themselves. Now, analogies and metaphors and real world applications are very, very useful. But this is a little bit like when a trainer will say, this is good for you if. Now, what I'm talking about today is sticky learning. So I could have said, this is absolutely brilliant if you want to make your learning sessions more sticky for your learners. That's it. Well, that's true. And I did say that very early on, but you'll have noticed since then I've been saying things like, this is great at a conference, or perhaps if you've got a meeting or a briefing, or if you want to share some ideas, if you want to put some new concepts out and you want people to engage with it. In other words, what I'm doing is I'm helping you to make meanings with what I'm sharing with you. So you're making your own connections. In the number peg system, you'll remember that none, shoe, tree, and all of those things. I said to you, you can use these images here, or you can use images that are important to you. You're starting to make those links for yourself. The more we can do that, the better we can help our audience to retain and recall. 5s and 6 now then. Pattern recognition is number 5, and that is exactly as it sounds. If your audience can start racing ahead and working things out, great. If you've got to explain every last bit, that's not so good. So we've got to be thinking about mind maps. If we can put hierarchies and structures, if we can put things out, I mentioned an org chart earlier, but if we can lay it out so people can see it, that's going to help our visual learners. If we can talk about it, that allows our audio-based learners to almost hear and sound out how this all works and comes together. So allowing patterns to be created and discussed and exploited, frankly, gives us an element of better retention and recall. And let's look at number 6. And this is exactly as it sounds. Can we present this in a way that is a little bit more attractive? Can we have infographics? If I've got some words on a screen, have I got the minimum number of words I can use? Or do I have some words on the screen that allow people to read it and in 1 or 2 sentences understand the concept? What about you as a presenter? How much thought have you put into how you put the information across? Can we use music? Can we use posters? Can we encourage audiences to create their own versions of what information looks like? The more that we can do this, the more that we're tying into these ideas of sticky learning. And these were the 6 sticky factors that I shared with you. Here's the weird thing. You can pair these off. So you can double up and get extra stickiness. So these are the combinations that I would suggest to you. Emotional elicitation. This is the order I did them, by the way. And multi-sensory. Now, I've used quite a few of these throughout today's session. And what you will find is that it helps many people. This is a numbers game. You'll never get everybody all the time, but many people to start to make these links between the different phrases so that they can start to understand and retain and recall that information. If it's helping with their memory and their attention and their motivation, all to the good. All of which, of course, brings me to the test. So our shopping list. Now, I wonder to what extent, I'm going to ask you 3 questions. What extent can you remember what was item number 3? So number 3, of course, was the tree. So what was the tree wrapped in? Because that was the shopping item I want you to remember. And what was item number 8? 8, you'll remember, was the weight. What was the weight covered in? And let's get a little bit show-offy here. At what position was the milk? What number position was the milk? So I'm pretty sure you've got those answers right. but just to make sure that they are. Now, the weird thing is about those 10, not only have you learnt the number peg system, but you've also probably learnt those 10 items. And I would challenge you later on, bit of spaced learning here, a bit of personal retrieval. If you come back to that list of 10, you will very, very likely remember them for quite some time. I don't just mean a few hours, I mean probably a few days. It's the weirdest thing, because what you've done is by using all of those techniques we've just spoken about, sticky learning, passed them from your working memory into your long-term memory. All right, so I am going to bring this program to a bit of a close. I'm hoping you found it useful and interesting and engaging. If you have, please make sure you, what do they say these days? Smash that follow, and make sure that you are subscribed, and keep an eye out for our next program. We'll see you soon.